the heart of a fading empire, where golden domes once shimmered with power and pride, silence now rules the halls. A young prince stands before his aging mentor, unaware that the whispers surrounding him are not just words. They are warnings, prophecies, and secrets that could either crown him a king or condemn him to ruin. The old man's trembling hand rests gently on the boy's shoulder, his voice low yet heavy with history. "Remember, my son," he says, "a throne is not built on marble. It is built on blood, loyalty, and the choices you cannot escape." The boy's eyes glisten with both fear and curiosity. Outside, the wind carries the scent of rebellion, the echo of soldiers who once shouted victory now fading into regret. The empire's fate rests in the fragile heart of this child who must learn to rule before he even learns to dream. Each night, under the flickering torchlight, the mentor teaches him not the art of war, but the art of survival. And as shadows grow longer, one question haunts them both. Can innocence survive in a world where even love is a weapon? The torches flickered weakly against the carved marble walls of the royal corridor. Each flame danced as though struggling for breath, mirroring the life of a kingdom that once burned bright and now gasped for survival. The air carried a stillness that was almost sacred, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps belonging to a boy who walked carefully beside his mentor. The old man's white beard gleamed faintly under the golden light, his eyes clouded with both wisdom and sorrow. The boy, no older than 10, clutched the folds of his embroidered robe, unsure if he was walking toward his destiny or away from it. The royal palace of Al-Zahara had been the beating heart of the empire for centuries. Its walls were covered with mosaics telling tales of victories, bravery, and divine right. But now those tales felt like lies whispered by ghosts. The once crowded halls were empty, the laughter of courtiers replaced by the sighs of wind slipping through broken lattice windows. The boy, Prince Rahim, had never known the empire's glory. To him, stories of his ancestors' power felt like distant myths. Yet, every time he walked beside his mentor, Al-Kamil, he could feel the weight of that forgotten greatness pressing down on his small shoulders. "Do you know why the torches are dim tonight, my prince?" asked Al-Kamil in a hushed tone. Rahim looked up, his wide eyes reflecting the wavering flames. "Because the oil is running low?" he guessed innocently. The old man smiled faintly. "No, my son. Because light has no strength where hearts are filled with fear. The empire's flame burns in its people, and when that flame dies, no torch can truly shine." Rahim did not fully understand, but he felt the truth in his mentor's words. He lowered his gaze, thinking of the soldiers he had seen earlier in the courtyard, tired, wounded, silent. Even the banners that once waved proudly now hung limp, their colors faded by time and defeat. Al-Kamil led him to the grand hall, a place where once kings had been crowned, poets had sung, and generals had sworn their oaths of loyalty. Now, it was a room of ghosts. Dust-covered thrones stood in silence, their golden edges dulled. In the far corner, a shattered vase lay as if even beauty had lost the will to remain whole. "Your father once stood here," said Al-Kamil, his voice trembling with reverence. He was a just ruler, but even he could not stop the tide of greed and betrayal. The empire fell not because of the sword, but because of the heart. Rahim approached the throne slowly. He could barely see over its armrest, yet the seat felt impossibly heavy to him. He touched the cold metal, and a strange chill ran down his spine. "Will I sit here one day?" he whispered. The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "If fate wills it, yes. But remember, to sit upon a throne is not to rule. It is to carry the weight of every tear shed by your people. A king must not only be strong, Rahim. He must be wise, patient, and merciful, even when mercy feels like weakness." The boy nodded, but in his young heart, he still longed to be brave, like the heroes in the tales he'd heard. He did not yet understand that bravery often meant enduring silence, not wielding a sword. As the night deepened, Al-Kamil lit a single candle on the marble altar. "Every king must learn 2 truths, he said softly. "First, that power is borrowed. Second, that time takes it back." The words lingered in the air like sacred scripture. Rahim turned to look at his mentor, confusion flickering across his face. "Then why teach me to rule if time will take it away?" Al-Kamil smiled, a weary, knowing smile. "Because, my prince, the measure of a ruler is not how long he reigns, but how long his people remember his kindness." The candle's flame trembled, casting their shadows high upon the walls. In that moment, Al-Kamil saw not just a boy, but the faint outline of a future ruler, a child burdened with the destiny of a dying empire. Outside, thunder rumbled over the desert. The storm was coming. Inside, the old man and the boy stood in silence, two souls bound by fate, one nearing the end of his journey, and the other just beginning his. And as the rain began to fall over the palace of Al-Zahara, the last prince of the empire whispered to himself, "Then I will learn. Even if the world forgets us, I will remember." That night, the torches flickered again, but this time, their light burned a little brighter. The next morning, the palace awoke to a cold stillness. The storm that had rolled over the desert had left the skies gray, and the scent of wet stone filled the air. Prince Rahim stood in the courtyard, watching droplets of rain slide down the marble columns. The world looked softer under the pale light, but the young prince's heart felt heavier. He had slept little, his mind echoing with his mentor's words. Power is borrowed, and time takes it back. Al-Kamil appeared silently, his robe damp from the morning mist. Despite his age, he moved with grace, his eyes sharp beneath the folds of his turban. In his hands he carried two wooden swords. He placed one before the prince and nodded. "Today you will learn the art of defense, not just of the body, but of the soul." Rahim hesitated. He had always wanted to learn the ways of warriors, but something in Al-Kamil's tone told him this lesson was not about battle. He picked up the wooden sword carefully. Al-Kamil raised his own. "A true ruler," he began, "must first learn what to protect. The throne? The palace? His own life? No, my son, he must protect truth. For when truth dies, kingdoms fall long before their walls do." They circled each other slowly. Rahim swung first, clumsy but earnest. Al-Kamil deflected with ease, his movements fluid and patient. "Do not strike from anger," he warned. "Strike from understanding." Rahim tried again, this time with more focus. Their swords clashed lightly, the sound echoing through the courtyard like whispers of forgotten battles. Between each movement, Al-Kamil spoke in low tones, weaving philosophy into every motion. "When you rule," he said, "you will face men who smile while plotting your downfall. You will face choices that make your heart bleed. To survive, you must learn to see through the darkness, not with your eyes, but with your heart." Rahim paused, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "And if my heart cannot see?" he asked quietly. "Then you must listen to those who can," Al-Kamil replied, lowering his sword. "No king stands alone. The wise listen before they command." He guided the boy's stance, adjusting his shoulders, his grip. Rahim watched his mentor's hands, steady, worn, marked by age, yet full of life. "Were you ever afraid?" the boy asked suddenly. Al-Kamil froze for a moment, his eyes distant. "Yes," he said softly. "When your father was a boy like you, I feared for him. I feared for this empire. But fear, Rahim, is not an enemy. It is a teacher. Learn from it, and you will never be its prisoner." They practiced until the sun broke through the clouds. The courtyard gleamed again with light, and Rahim's arms ached from the effort. But Al-Kamil smiled with quiet pride. "You learn quickly. Remember every lesson, every scar, every tear. These are the tools of a ruler." Rahim nodded, breathing heavily. He looked out across the palace walls, beyond which lay the vast desert, golden and endless. Somewhere out there, enemies plotted, and the empire's borders grew weaker with each passing year. "Master," Rahim said, "if our kingdom is dying, why not flee? Why stay here and wait for it to fall?" Al-Kamil turned toward the horizon. "Because this palace, these walls, this history, they are not just stone. They are memory. If we leave, everything dies. But if you stay, if you learn, if you carry its spirit within you, then Al-Zahara will never truly be gone." The boy fell silent. His young mind could not yet grasp the weight of those words, but his heart felt them deeply. That night after the lesson, Rahim sat alone in his chamber. The wind rustled the silk curtains, and the faint sound of music from the distant quarters drifted in, a melody from better days. He stared at his reflection in the polished brass mirror. The eyes that looked back at him seemed older than before, filled with questions the world had not yet answered. He remembered the faces of the servants who bowed before him, the guards who stood weary at the gates, and the children of the city who played with wooden toys in the dust. He wondered if they even knew how close their world was to ending. As he lay in bed, he thought of his father, the king he never truly knew, the man whose shadow he now walked in. The stories said he was brave, but Al-Kamil's eyes always held sorrow when he spoke of him. What kind of courage did it take to rule, he wondered, when every choice led to pain? Outside, thunder rolled once more. Rahim turned on his side, clutching his blanket. "I will not be afraid," he whispered to himself. "I will learn. I will protect." In the hall beyond his chamber, Al-Kamil stood silently, listening. The old man's heart ached with pride and dread alike. He knew the path ahead for the young prince would not be one of glory, but of sacrifice. And yet, for the first time in years, a flicker of hope returned to his tired eyes. The boy was beginning to understand. The days that followed were heavy with unease. A quiet tension lingered in every hall of Al-Zahara. Servants spoke in hushed voices, guards exchanged uncertain glances, and even the air seemed to carry the weight of something unspoken. The storm had passed, but a different kind of darkness had settled, a storm of hearts, not of skies. Prince Rahim continued his lessons with Al-Kamil, yet he could sense that his mentor's thoughts were elsewhere. The old man often paused mid-sentence, his eyes distant, as if hearing voices from the past. One evening, after a long day of study, Rahim dared to ask, "Master, what troubles you?" Al-Kamil turned to him slowly. His face, usually calm, bore the marks of exhaustion. "The burden of truth, my prince," he said softly. "It grows heavier with age." Rahim tilted his head in confusion. "What truth?" The old man sighed, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a nearby scroll. "The truth of your bloodline." He unrolled the parchment, revealing a faded seal, the emblem of the royal house, intertwined with symbols Rahim had never seen before. "There are things you were never told, Rahim. Things your father swore to keep secret to protect you." The boy's heartbeat quickened. "Tell me," Al-Kamil hesitated. "You are not only the son of a king," he began, "but also the son of betrayal." Rahim's eyes widened. "Betrayal?" "Yes." The old man's voice cracked slightly. "Your mother was not of noble blood. She came from the southern tribes, people the court once called rebels. Your father loved her against the will of his council, and for that love he paid dearly. The ministers saw her as a threat, a symbol of defiance. When your father refused to cast her aside, they turned their daggers not on her, but on him." Rahim stepped back, his small hands trembling. "You mean they killed him?" Al-Kamil's silence was answer enough. The room seemed to close in around the prince. The air grew colder, his mind spinning with disbelief. The tales he had been told of his father's honorable death in battle suddenly felt hollow, like lies crafted to hide something shameful. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he whispered. "Because truth is a blade, my son," Al-Kamil said gravely. "It cuts deep, and only those with strong hearts can bear it. I feared you were too young." Rahim turned away, tears burning his eyes. "And now?" "Now," the old man replied, "you are no longer a child. You must know what you fight for, and what blood flows in your veins. You are the bridge between two worlds, the empire and the desert tribes. If you survive, you may be the only one who can unite them." The prince stood silent, absorbing the words like wounds. He had dreamed of becoming a wise ruler, a brave king like the heroes in the stories. But now he felt tainted, half royal, half outcast. He clenched his fist. "If my father died for love," he said bitterly, "then this empire deserves to fall." Al-Kamil's eyes softened with pain. "No, Rahim, do not let anger blind you. Your father's love was not his weakness, it was his strength. He believed that mercy could heal what power could not. That is why he entrusted me to teach you." The boy's breathing slowed. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "End the circle," said the mentor, stepping closer. "End the hatred that killed your father. The world does not need another conqueror. It needs a king who can forgive." Rahim lowered his gaze, his tears falling onto the cold marble floor. The truth had shaken him to his core, yet beneath the sorrow a spark ignited, a fierce determination to understand his destiny. That night, he wandered the palace alone. The corridors, lit by flickering lanterns, seemed to whisper to him. He paused before his father's portrait, a regal man with eyes much like his own. "They took you from me," he murmured, "but I will not let them take your dream." Outside, in the courtyard, a shadow moved. A messenger in dark robes approached the palace gates, carrying urgent news from the borders. The neighboring warlords were gathering armies. The fall of Al-Zahara was no longer a whisper, it was a promise. When Al-Kamil read the letter, his face turned pale. "It has begun," he said under his breath. "The vultures have come for what remains." Rahim entered just as the old man folded the parchment. "Tell me," he demanded. "What does it say?" Al-Kamil looked at him, his heart torn between fear and pride. "It says that destiny no longer waits, my prince. It comes for you now." The boy stood still, his small figure framed by the dying firelight. For the first time he did not look like a child, but like the echo of a ruler yet to be. And as the night deepened over the broken empire, the boy who carried the burden of blood made a silent vow. He would rise, not to avenge his father, but to redeem him. The morning sun rose red over the desert, a cruel omen. The golden towers of Al-Zahara shimmered in the heat, but beneath their splendor the city trembled. Messengers came and went like restless shadows, bringing news that grew darker with every hour. The enemy had crossed the river. The outposts had fallen. The empire was breathing its last. Prince Rahim stood on the palace balcony, staring at the horizon, where a faint line of dust marked the approach of war. The city below him, once alive with merchants and laughter, had become a sea of fear. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers sharpened their blades in silence. The boy felt the weight of their terror press upon his chest like armor too heavy for his frame. Al-Kamil entered quietly, his robes rustling in the wind. His face was pale, his hands trembling, yet his voice remained steady. "They are 3 days away," he said. "Their banners stretch farther than the eye can see." Rahim turned, his eyes fierce but uncertain. "And what do we have, master?" "Broken walls and frightened men." Al-Kamil walked closer. "We have something they do not, a reason to fight. They seek gold and glory. You must fight for your people, for your father's memory, for mercy." Rahim clenched his fists. "I am no warrior." "No," Al-Kamil replied softly. "You are something greater. A ruler who understands fear." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Do you remember what I taught you? Power is borrowed. Time takes it back. But honor, my prince. Honor cannot be taken, only lost." Those words settled deep within Rahim's heart. As the day faded, the council of nobles gathered in the grand hall. Their jeweled robes and trembling hands betrayed their panic. Some urged surrender, others whispered escape. One man, a broad-shouldered general, slammed his fist on the table. "We must flee, your highness! Save the bloodline, save yourself!" Rahim rose from his seat, his small frame dwarfed by the marble throne behind him. "If I run," he said quietly, "who will stand for those who cannot? Who will speak for the children, the widows, the nameless soldiers? No, I will not abandon them." The hall fell silent. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, ashamed before the courage of a boy. That night, Rahim and Al-Kamil walked the ramparts together. The desert wind carried the scent of smoke and steel. In the distance, the first torches of the approaching army flickered like fireflies in the dark. Al-Kamil spoke softly, his voice breaking. "Your father once stood here on a night just like this. I see his strength in you, Rahim." The boy looked up, eyes glistening. "Was he afraid?" "Yes," said the old man. "But he stood anyway. That is all courage truly is." As dawn broke, the drums of war thundered across the dunes. The enemy banners appeared on the horizon, crimson against the gold. The gates of Al-Zahara creaked open and soldiers took their positions. Archers lined the walls. The sound of drawn bows filled the air like a single breath held by a dying world. Rahim stood among them, dressed not in royal silk, but in simple armor, his father's sword sheathed at his side. The blade was far too large for him, yet when he touched its hilt, he felt his blood burn with purpose. The first arrows flew. The battle had begun. For hours, chaos ruled. The city shook with the clash of steel and the cries of the fallen. Flames rose from the lower quarters as catapults hurled fire over the walls. The enemy poured in through the broken gates, their war cries echoing through every street. Al-Kamil fought beside his prince as best his old body allowed, his staff striking down soldiers who dared approach. "Stay close," he shouted over the roar. "Do not let them take you!" But in the smoke and confusion, Rahim was pulled away by the tide of battle. He found himself face to face with a young enemy soldier, barely older than himself. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The boy saw fear in the soldier's eyes, the same fear that lived in his own. Instead of striking, Rahim dropped his sword. The soldier hesitated, then turned and fled. Rahim sank to his knees, the noise of battle fading to a hum in his ears. All around him, Al-Zahara burned. When Al-Kamil found him, the old man's robe was torn, his face streaked with blood and dust. "My prince," he gasped, "we must go." Rahim looked toward the collapsing palace. "No, not yet." Together they climbed the steps to the throne room one last time. The ceiling had fallen, the mosaics shattered. The throne stood half buried in rubble, gleaming faintly in the smoke. Rahim touched it once, then turned away. "The empire is gone," he whispered. Al-Kamil placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "No, my son. The empire lives in you. Outside, the enemy broke through the final gate." Trumpets blared and the sound of conquest filled the air. But within those crumbling walls, a boy and his mentor stood tall, unbowed, unbroken. As they fled through a secret passage beneath the palace, Rahim looked back one last time at the city that had been his home, his prison and his destiny. He did not cry. He only whispered a promise into the smoke. "I will return, not as a king, but as the memory of one." And with that, the last prince of Al-Zahara disappeared into the desert night, carrying with him the soul of a fallen empire. The desert stretched endless before him, an ocean of gold and silence. The boy who had once been a prince now walked barefoot through the sands, the wind biting at his face, the sun unforgiving above. Behind him, the empire of Al-Zahara burned to ashes, its towers crumbling under the weight of history. Ahead lay only exile, uncertainty, and a destiny still unfulfilled. Al-Kamil walked beside him, leaning heavily on his staff. Age and battle had drained his strength, yet his eyes burned with quiet determination. The two figures, one old and broken, one young and burdened, moved through the wasteland like shadows of a forgotten legend. Days passed without rest. Their food ran low, their water skins emptied under the merciless sun. At night, when the stars spread across the sky like shattered jewels, Rahim would sit beside the dying fire, staring into the distance. The flames reminded him of Al-Zahara, the flickering light of a world now gone. "Master," he asked one night, his voice weak but steady, "what becomes of a king with no kingdom?" Al-Kamil smiled faintly, his face illuminated by the firelight. "Then he becomes something greater," he said. "A teacher, a story, a hope." Rahim looked at him curiously. "Hope for whom?" "For those who come after," the old man said. "Empires fall, my prince, always, but their spirit lives in the hearts of those who remember. And one day, perhaps long after you and I are dust, someone will rebuild what was lost, because they heard your name whispered in the wind." Rahim fell silent, his heart torn between grief and resolve. He was young, but the pain in him had already aged his soul. By the seventh day, Al-Kamil's strength began to fail. The old man stumbled, his breath ragged. Rahim rushed to his side, trying to hold him upright, but the mentor only smiled. "Do not grieve, my son," he whispered. "My path ends here. Yours has only begun." Tears welled in Rahim's eyes. "No, master, you cannot leave me. I don't know how to rule, how to rebuild, how to be strong without you." Al-Kamil placed a trembling hand on the boy's cheek. "Strength is not the absence of pain, Rahim. It is the will to keep walking despite it." He coughed, his voice fading. "Promise me one thing, never become what destroyed us. Do not rule with fear. Rule with love, as your father did." "I promise," Rahim said through tears. The old man's gaze softened. "Then I can rest." As the first light of dawn crept across the dunes, Al-Kamil breathed his last. The desert wind rose around them, lifting the sand in soft spirals as if the earth itself mourned him. Rahim buried his mentor beneath a lone acacia tree, carving into the trunk the words his master had lived by. "Power is borrowed. Time takes it back, but honor remains eternal." For a long time the boy knelt in silence. Then, standing tall against the rising sun, he whispered, "You taught me to protect truth. Now I will protect your memory." Months passed. Rahim wandered across the desert, finding refuge among tribes that had once been enemies of his father. They saw in him not a prince, but a survivor. His humility, his wisdom beyond his years, earned him respect. He listened more than he spoke, healed disputes between rival clans, and shared stories of Al-Zahara, not of its gold or grandeur, but of its courage and kindness. Slowly, the desert began to remember his name. Years later, when the boy had grown into a man, travelers would speak of a leader who wore no crown yet ruled hearts, a man who united tribes once sworn to hatred, a man whose justice was tempered with mercy. They called him the Desert Crown. He never returned to rebuild the marble walls of Al-Zahara, for he understood now that empires of stone crumble, but empires of spirit endure. Instead, he built schools in the sands where children learned not war but wisdom. He told them stories of a boy who carried the tears of a kingdom, of an old teacher who believed in forgiveness, of a flame that never died, and every night before he slept beneath the open sky, Rahim looked toward the horizon where his city once stood. The wind that swept across the dunes seemed to whisper his mentor's words. The empire lives in you. One evening, an old traveler found him sitting by a small fire, his face calm, his eyes reflecting the stars. "Are you truly the last prince of Al-Zahara?" the traveler asked. Rahim smiled. "There are no last princes," he said softly. "Only those who remember." The next morning, when the sun rose over the desert, Rahim was gone. Only his footprints remained, leading toward the horizon, where sand met sky, and so the legend of the boy king who lost everything but found his soul lived on. The people of the desert spoke his name with reverence, teaching their children the story of the prince who became a symbol of endurance, mercy, and hope. In time, the empire of Al-Zahara became a tale told by the firelight, its marble towers forgotten by history. But the name of Rahim, the Desert Crown, was never lost. It drifted on the wind, eternal and unbroken, just as his master had promised.